Yeah.
My only problem.
Ryan, you do talk about the clones and the cutting, and you do separate that into other things, especially if, one of the things we were worried about is, if people are going to be able to change their carrier 4 times a year, to be able to hold on to veg and genetics ready for that patient based on what illness they come in the center with, so we can pull those out of the genetics that we have ready and actually put them into a flowering state, where then we can actually harvest that, and if they wanted to, they could change after that. But there really is no way to veg plant, flower plant that instantly either. So we looked at that throughout these 4 steps. It'll take a while, and it'll keep going back and forth. Figuring out, we went back and forth trying to figure this out, and you really do have to read the whole thing to understand how it all fits together.
Yeah, one other comment in response to what you said, Bob, is that we recognize that once the plant or the clone, we're not defining it as a medical marijuana plant. It is marijuana. The plant is not medical. However, once it is to grow and is going to be sold, then it becomes inventory. You need to account for it in some way. And I think law enforcement has a reasonable right to have that expectation. Once it comes into inventory and it's something that's going to be sold to the public, then it becomes inventory, and we should definitely account for it.
It becomes part of our plant count.
Yeah, and become part of our plant count at that point.
Just 2 very brief things is that this definition, remember, of medical marijuana plant, kind of like what Matt was saying, is going to be limited to, in particular, the unlawful act section, where it says it shall be unlawful to possess more than 6 plants. So, and to reconcile the inherent conflict and the inherent discrepancies between 6 plants and 2 ounces, number 1. Number 2, if we go back to the rule of UCF, that regardless of the illegalities or the unlawfulness of the possession of 6 or more plants in the vegging cycle, we do propose in our rules that every single plant in the grow is accounted for, and that there is a true and accurate accounting of plant, medical or not, and that all that information, of course, is to be made available to the department, in a real-time basis. So it's not so much a matter of fudging numbers or fudging plants. No, there is going to be operational transparency all the way through. It's just from a practical cultivation perspective, the flowering plants are the ones in our belief that should be subject to the unlawful act section, because they're the ones that have medical value, they're the ones that are psychotropic, and they're the ones that really account for any diversion of dangers. So focus should be on that.
I have a question from what Nick had said of, the fundamental concept that a clone is a medical plant. I understand that that goes into the inventory. I have some questions. I guess I have some questions about the concept that the clone becomes a medical plant once it goes into the inventory to be sold. Because if we're talking about this concept of seed to sale, and technically, and I want some legal backup on this, but some people have said that seeds are a non-usable genetic material, and if a clone is sort of the same as starting from seed, why would not a clone be considered a non-medical genetic material in the same sense? And this is just a question, obviously this is a question that comes from my mind, and I would like some feedback from the rest of the group.
Actually, I would refer that either to Ryan or Brian.
At the time that you're selling it, so if it's not a work in progress, it's not in your optional premises, and it's basically you're working on it, whatnot, when you take it out of there and you put it into basically the constitution hands of a patient, that becomes a number. So as soon as you put it into that location, then
but then as soon as that patient buys it, it's their number and it's no longer your number.
Yeah, correct. When it's at the center though, as soon as it hits the center, it becomes an inventory item.
I understand that argument. I think that differs from the concept that if you had a crop that was somehow seeded through a male plant and you decided to harvest those seeds and sell them on to your patients, that would not count as a plant. And so I think because we use clones in a similar way that we use seeds, I find some conflict between the separation of that definition of usable genetic material versus a medical marijuana plant.
But it's not in the optional premise. I mean, it's just
Oh,
like if
I
you're
understand I'm just providing a different perspective because I think it's something that my brain questions. And I wasn't a part of this initial discussion, so I have questions about things that you probably have been over and over. And I apologize for that, but I just see some equivalence to the concept of usable genetic materials versus the concept of a usable medical product.
Barb, did you have?
Your question is absolutely fair. We've gone through all these questions 100 times, but we're just at the other end.
Call me next time, I'll
don't-
come in here.
So don't apologize, it's fine. The way we set it up relative to the statute, by definition of cultivation and manufacturing, and the way in which we define those rules relate to location. So
I totally-
those are, and that's why Ryan keeps bringing up location. And so we have, based on the statute, to possess anything is under the idea of 6 plants or 2 ounces. That's, as businesses, what we can legally do. So the way that we defined it is on a cultivation manufacturing side, which happens at the grow, it is counted as plants. And so we have the definitions under cultivation manufacturing and how we can account for clones in that area, mothers, vegging plants, blooming plants, relative to cultivation manufacturing and relative to location. Once, and in that process of those 4 points we talked about, once you get to distribution and sale and it moves to the retail center, you still must count all product under those 2 definitions, either your 2 ounces or your plants. And so once that's at the retail center, we chose to say, how are we going to legally possess this on a retail level? Do we want to count it as weight or do we want to count it as plants? We have to count it as one. So at the center, we now count it as a plant so that it goes towards the count.
That
And
makes great sense. I
it
just
goes
feel
back
like
to the statute.
this,
That's how we got there.
it raises questions to my mind and,
That was
this
the
all
point,
makes
is,
sense.
we couldn't have our cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, no, nor was I
that's the
suggesting
issue.
that,
So
I just was suggesting that.
if we're saying it's a work in
Yeah.
progress,
Yeah.
it becomes a weight.
Kind of talking over each other.
One more thought. Nowhere has plant ever been defined yet. That's what you're trying to do here. It's not been defined in the Constitution. It's not defined in the statute. And I think most of us know that to use plant count at all as a measuring tool is pointless, really, if you think about it, because canopy size is much more relevant measuring stick to decide, what's a big grow and what's a small grow. I mean, I think we've all probably seen one plant grows that are huge that probably yield 2 or 3 pounds. And we've also probably seen 200 plant grows that yield 0. So to use plant count, if you think about it, to use plant count really is irrelevant. It's kind of a pointless measuring stick in a way. I understand the drafters of the Constitution wanted to put some limits, but what's happening in California is they're looking at canopy size as the real measuring stick. So I'm wondering, given that plants have never been defined, and what is a plant has never been defined, we can define that through regulation as a size or a weight of something. A plant constitutes, something that weighs X amount, because then that is more, I just think that's a lot more truthful and relevant than trying to count these plants that have massive variation among them. So that's just a thought to throw out there. I mean, because we can create the definition of plant right here in this regulation, since the legislature did not define it and the framers of the Constitution did not define it. So it could be up to us to define what is a plant and what isn't a plant. It doesn't have to be one thing sticking out of a grow medium. It can be a weight of some sort.
I think it's unfair to regulate how people grow. And I think if you're talking about predictability, what I've learned in the last year is that really what the biggest predictability of harvest is wattage, not plant, not weight, but wattage. How much light is it getting? So if you're looking at predictability, then wattage is probably what we should be looking at. Because I think, I've got one grow where people grow 5-foot plants, under 2 lights, then I've got another grower who's growing 20 plants under 1 light in a sea of green technology. So I think, to regulate what a plant is and dictate how the growers grow is probably not